12 staff members pressed against the walls of Intake Bay 4, every one of them. In the center, a human woman sat on the processing bench, ceramic mug raised halfway to her lips. On every screen in the room, the molecular structure of hydrochloric acid pulsed red. The woman lowered her mug, looked around. Did I do something wrong? Routine intake, nothing complicated, Colvan had said that morning, handing Thalessi the scanner. That was 6 hours and 1 molecular revelation ago, back when the cargo ship's docking clamps were still warm. Anya Petrov was the 9th arrival Thalessi had processed since her rotation began. Human, female, 26, cargo loader. The woman settled onto the intake bench with the loose ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime hauling things heavier than herself. And Thalessi's scanner caught the details in sequence. Muscle density 23%, above Mivrani baseline for comparable mass. Keratinized ridges across both palms thick enough to register as dermal plating, and a micro-fracture line across the left central incisor that had healed without medical intervention. Manual labor, Anya said, catching Thalessi's gaze on her hands. Family farm, grain hauling since I was 12. Thalessi entered the note. Her stylus trembled slightly. It always did when humans made eye contact. Their eyes had whites. It made every glance feel like exposure. Vitals came next. Cardiac rhythm, strong, slightly elevated by Mivrani parameters but within documented human range. Core temperature, 37.1 Celsius. Oxygen saturation, 98%. Everything flagged warm, dense, and alive in ways that Mivrani bodies simply were not. A sharp ceramic sound. Anya had set her mug on the bench. Chipped on the rim, dark stains baked into the interior, a name scratched into the side in blocky letters. Steam curled from whatever was inside. What is that liquid? Coffee. Anya tilted the mug toward her. Want some? Thalessi declined. The scan moved deeper. If you're here with us for the first time, come back tomorrow. We've got stories the galaxy doesn't want you to hear. Beneath the dermal layer, past the musculature and the rib cage, Thalessi's scanner reached the digestive cavity. The readout spiked. She blinked at the number, cleared the display, and reinitialized. Same result, which meant the readings were wrong. They had to be. She tapped the scanner's casing twice, a habit Colvan had told her to stop, and ran the sweep a third time. pH 1.5. The number sat on her screen like a warning she didn't have clearance for. Thalessi pulled up the reference index. Mivrani internal pH 6.8. Scanner tolerance floor 4.0. The acid inside this woman's stomach sat 3 full points below the minimum her equipment was designed to measure. She called Colvan over. He crossed the bay in 4 strides, read the display, and stopped moving. That can't be right. His voice was level, but his chromatophores had gone pale. That pH dissolves duranium plating. Thalessi rescanned. Same result. Colvan took the scanner from her hands, recalibrated it himself, and ran it again. Same result. Then the second reading came through, and Thalessi felt something cold settle in her chest. The stomach lining, the tissue directly touching that acid, was being actively dissolved. Layer by layer, the acid was digesting the organ that contained it. But adjacent to every site of erosion, new cells were forming, growing, replacing what was lost. The entire gastric surface was rebuilding itself on a 72 to 96-hour cycle. Constant destruction, constant regeneration, the human body at war with itself and winning every 3 days like clockwork. Anya took another sip of coffee. Colvan pulled Thalessi's station into full diagnostic mode. She watched his hands. To steady for 30 years of xenobiology, input the commands with a precision that made her own fingers feel boneless. The results didn't arrive gradually, they cascaded. Every screen in Intake Bay 4 lit simultaneously. The same data mirrored 12 times across the room. Like a warning, the station itself was trying to shout. Human gastric acid, pH range, 1.5 to 3.5. Produced at a rate of approximately 1.5 liters per day as a standard metabolic function, not a response to threat. Not a glandular anomaly, just Tuesday, capable of dissolving zinc, capable of corroding mild steel, present in every living human, from birth without exception. A soft chime from Thalessi's secondary scanner. She had left it pointed at the bench, at the mug. The readout identified caffeine, a compound flagged as a Class 2 neurological stimulant across 7 registered systems, restricted distribution, controlled dosage protocols, and the human had poured it into a ceramic mug, added 2 sugars, and called it breakfast. Sometimes twice, Anya had mentioned when Thalessi asked how often she drank it. Casual, like frequency, was the strangest part of the question. Thalessi became aware of movement around her, not toward the exits, toward the walls. Senior technicians, intake staff, 2 other researchers, all of them pressing backward with the slow, deliberate retreat of people who did not want to be noticed moving. No one spoke. No one looked away from the screens, either. Colvan himself had taken 3 steps back from the bench before he seemed to realize he'd done it. Not because Anya was aggressive, not because she had threatened anyone, but because she was sitting 4 meters away, drinking a controlled substance for pleasure, while her body produced enough acid to dissolve the station's intake instruments, and she had absolutely no idea that any of this was remarkable. How does a species survive its own biology long enough to build starships? Thalessi didn't have an answer. She wasn't sure the databases did, either. And now, under the silence of that backed-away room, Anya lowered her mug. The confusion on her face was genuine. Thalessi could see it in the tightness around her eyes, the slight tilt of her head, the way her chipped tooth caught her bottom lip. My stomach's always been like this. Anya looked from Thalessi to Colvan, to the frozen technicians along the far wall. Is that not normal? Nobody answered. Colvan's chromatophores had drained to a color Thalessi had never seen on him before, somewhere between gray and translucent, the pigment equivalent of a flinch. Thalessi opened her mouth, closed it, and looked down at her scanner as though it might offer a sentence she could borrow. Quarantine Director Sal's voice came through the overhead comm 14 minutes later. Thalessi had spent those 14 minutes standing very still, rereading the molecular breakdown of hydrochloric acid, as if repetition might make the numbers more reasonable. It did not. Sal had read the report. His voice carried the flat cadence of someone choosing clinical distance over whatever he was actually feeling. One directive: do not let her near the equipment storage or the hull plating. The comm clicked off. Anya had already left, cleared through processing, her boot steps fading down the corridor toward crew quarters. But no one had re-entered. On the bench, but no one had re-entered. On the bench where Anya Petrov had sat drinking her breakfast, the chipped ceramic mug waited. Coffee cold, her name scratched into the side in letters that looked like they'd been carved with a cargo key. On the nearest screen, the molecular diagram of hydrochloric acid still pulsed its quiet red, patient, as if it had always been there and no one had thought to look. Somewhere on the station, a woman with acid in her stomach and a gap in her smile was starting her first shift. Somewhere in this bay, a mug that no one would touch sat cooling under a diagram that no one would dismiss. Which one, Thalessi wondered, was the more dangerous thing to leave unattended? If that question unsettles you, you're in the right place. What would you have done standing in that room, reading those numbers? Tomorrow the station logs open again.